The wind never stopped. It was the first thing to greet Clara McAllister when she topped the rise, and it would be the last thing she felt before sleep, assuming sleep came. It clawed at the brim of her father's old hat, pushing it back, trying to see her face. She pushed it right back down, low over her eyes. The hat was soft felt, stained with her father's sweat and stained with the years. It was the only piece of him she had left. It was her only armor. Below her, Cedar Gap lay quiet in the bruised light of late afternoon. It looked smaller than she remembered, drier. The wind stripped the paint from the false front buildings, leaving the main street a streak of pale dust and splintered wood. Her mare, a tired roan, took the downgrade with a heavy sigh. Clara's knuckles were white on the reins. 5 years gone, and the town looked like it had been holding its breath, waiting for her to come back just so it could exhale its judgment. It started as soon as she passed the smithy. The ringing hammer went silent. 1 beat, 2, then it started again, but slower, changed. She kept her eyes forward, fixed on the space between her horse's ears. She did not look at the hardware store, where Mr. Hemphill stood frozen, a crate of nails dangling from his hand. She did not look at the mercantile, where 2 women in drab calico dresses, women she had known since childhood, stopped their chatter. They turned as one, their faces hard as porcelain, and watched her pass. The whispers started then, quiet as snake scale on dry leaves. "That's her, McAllister's girl. Got some nerve. Bold, too bold." The word followed her, the same word they had always used. Bold. They said it like a curse. She rode past the alley beside the Eaton Bank. Her stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. The memory was always there, waiting in the shadows of that alley. It did not fade. Not really. It just waited. The smell of hay and sour whiskey. The splintered barn wall digging into her back. Randolph Eaton's heavy breathing. His words thick and blurred. "You wanted this. Clara, coming out here, acting like a man." He had been wrong. She had been checking on a sick foal for her father. He had followed her. The weight of him, the panic, hot and sharp as a needle in her throat, her hand scrabbling for the harness hook, finding nothing. Then his hand, tearing at the collar of her shirt. No, not the collar. Her hand had found the pistol, the one her father insisted she carry after dusk. It was small, a Derringer, but it was heavy. It was cold. The boom was deafening in the small space. It sounded final. The silence that came after was worse. The way he looked at her, surprised, before he slid down the wall. The sudden dark stain spreading on his fine wool vest. Clara blinked, forcing the dust and the memory from her eyes. The street was empty again. The trial had been a blur of shouted words and the stony face of Judge Parker. Acquitted. He had said self-defense. The word was meaningless. The law had set her free, but the town had passed its own sentence. Randolph Eaton was the banker's son. She was just Clara McAllister, the girl who was too bold, the girl who now carried the stink of scandal. Her father, his heart already weakened by the drought and the debt, had died 6 months later. They said it was his heart. Clara knew it was the shame. She dismounted in front of the sheriff's office. The word Eaton still painted on the bank window across the street. The irony was bitter as alkali dust. She tied the roan to the hitching post. Her legs felt stiff. She took a breath, adjusted the hat, and pushed the door open. The office was small, hot, and smelled of stale cigar smoke. Sheriff Willard Mays did not look up. He was a large man, soft in the middle, with a face that looked like it was slowly melting over his starched collar. He was, she knew, Randolph Eaton's uncle. He finished writing a line in his ledger, meticulously dipped his pen, and set it down before he finally raised his eyes. They were pale, watery, and held no surprise at all. He had been waiting for her. "Clara," he said. His voice was too smooth. We heard you were coming back. The stage line carries more than passengers. Sheriff, she said. Her voice was steady. She would not let it shake. I'm here about my father's land. Ah, yes, the McAllister place. He leaned back, his chair groaning in protest. He laced his thick fingers over his stomach. Sad business. That, a tragedy. It's my land now, Clara said. I've come to settle the debt. The notice said it was held by the county. Held by the county. Yes, Mays smiled, a slow, unpleasant stretch of his lips. But administered by my office, and, as it happens, the debt, plus 5 years of interest and county taxes. It was acquired, legally, by a benefactor. Clara felt the floor tilt. What benefactor? The Eaton family, he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. They wish to spare the county the trouble of a foreclosed property. Generous, wouldn't you say? Especially after, the air left her lungs. They had taken it while she was gone, trying to earn enough money to come back. They had simply taken it. They cannot do that, she whispered. Oh, they can, Clara, they have. He leaned forward, his smile gone. But, knowing you were Angus's daughter, I spoke on your behalf. They are willing to be compassionate. He let the word hang in the hot, still air. They are willing, he continued, to lease the land back to you. A sharecrop arrangement. You work the land, you restore the cabin. We, that is, I, will provide the seed and supplies. You will pay the bank 50% of whatever you grow. He watched her, his pale eyes bright. Of course, given your reputation and the fact that you are an unmarried woman, the arrangement would require my personal supervision. To ensure the bank's investment is protected, I would need to ride out, regularly, check on things. The implication was as sharp and dirty as a skinning knife. He wanted her on his land, under his control, a woman alone, beholden to him, the man whose nephew she had killed. It was not justice, it was vengeance, served slow and cold. Clara looked at his soft hands, then at the butt of the revolver holstered at his thick waist. She thought of her father's grave, up on the hill. She thought of the hat on her head. No, she said. The sheriff's face darkened. No, girl, that land is gone. This is the only way you'll set foot on it. That land has a lien against it, not a judgment, Clara said, her voice finding its steel. She had spent 5 years learning the law, reading books until her eyes burned. The debt is payable. I have the money. I will pay the county clerk. I will file for the deed in my name. The clerk works for me, Mays said softly. The papers will get lost. The fees will be high. Then I will ride to Cheyenne and speak to the territorial governor. Mays stared at her. The pretense of civility vanished. You are a fool, he spat. You think you can just ride back in here after what you did? You are spoiled goods. Clara, no one wants you here. No one will help you. He stood up, his shadow falling over her. You listen to me. Your father died broken because he didn't know his place. You think you're better? You're just like him, too stubborn to see the truth. You accept my offer, or you ride out. If you stay, if you try to fight this, you will end up just like him, or worse. He leaned closer. A bold woman dies fast out here, Clara, and nobody even bothers to ask why. Clara held his gaze. Her heart was a cold stone in her chest, but she would not let him see her fear. I am not my father, sheriff, and I am not afraid of you. I will have my land. She turned, her back straight, and walked out. The slam of the door was not enough to cover the sound of his low, angry laugh. She stopped at the cemetery first. It was on the hill overlooking the town, the grass burned yellow by the sun. His grave was simple. Angus McAllister, 1820 to 1870. A good man. She knelt and ran her fingers over the carved letters. I'm home. Papa? she whispered to the wind. "They think they can scare me off. They think I'll run." She straightened the small pile of stones at the head of the marker. "I'm not running. Not this time. I'll get it back. I promise." The sun was low when she pushed open the bat-wing doors of the Golden Nugget Saloon. Silence fell, thick and immediate. The piano player's hands froze over the keys. A man in the middle of a story stopped, his mouth open. Every eye turned to her. A woman, alone, in a saloon, wearing a man's hat. And not just any woman, her. Clara ignored them. She walked to the bar, her boots loud on the boards. The bartender, a man with a heavy mustache, just stared. "Whiskey," she said. He blinked. "Ma'am?" "Whiskey, the cheap kind, and a dipper of water." He glanced around, nervous, then poured the drink. She paid with a coin, her hand steady, and turned. She needed a table, needed to think. A lanky cowboy deliberately stuck his boot out. She saw it too late. She tripped, hard, the whiskey flying from her hand as she stumbled, catching herself on the edge of a card table. A roar of laughter filled the room. "Watch your step, little lady," the cowboy drawled, his friends hooting. It was Jeb Parsons, a man who had been Randolph Eaton's shadow. Clara righted herself, her face burning. She did not look at him. She looked at her empty hand. "Looks like you spilled your courage," Parsons sneered. She turned back to the bar. "Another—" Before the bartender could move, a quiet voice spoke from the corner. "Leave her be. Jeb." The voice was low, rough, like dry gravel. The saloon went quiet again, but this was a different silence. It was tight, afraid. Clara turned. He was sitting alone at a back table, his chair tilted against the wall, shadows covering most of his face. He was not large, not like the sheriff. He was lean, dressed in trail-worn denim and leather. He had not moved, had not stood up. He just watched. Jeb Parsons' sneer faltered. "I ain't doing nothing. Reed, just having some fun." "You're done," the man named Reed said. It was not a request. Parsons swallowed. He looked at Clara, then at Reed, and his bluster evaporated. He grumbled something under his breath and turned back to his cards, kicking his chair hard. The man in the corner pushed his chair forward. He stood up, slowly. He walked not to Clara, but to the bar, laying a coin down. "Another for the lady," he said to the bartender. "And a rag." He picked up the glass and the wet rag and walked to her. Clara braced herself for the smirk, for the pitying look, for the suggestive offer. It was always one of them. But Jackson Reed did none of those things. He was older than her, maybe 30. His face was all harsh angles, burned brown by the sun, with a latticework of scars at his temple. But his eyes were gray and still, and they looked at her without a trace of judgment. He did not look at her like she was a scandal, or a target, or a prize. He just saw her. He handed her the glass. He held out the rag. "Floor's uneven," he said, his voice quiet. Clara stared at him. She took the glass. She took the rag. She did not know what to say. "Thank you," she managed. He just nodded, a single, short dip of his chin. Then he turned, walked back to his dark corner, sat down, and returned to his own drink as if nothing had ever happened. Clara found an empty table, her back to the wall, and drank the whiskey. It burned, but it burned clean. Word spread through Cedar Gap faster than a prairie fire. Clara McAllister was not leaving. She had refused the sheriff's offer. She was going to fight for the McAllister land, and she was going to do it alone. The next morning, she rode out. The cabin was 3 miles north of town, nestled in a small dip of land that was supposed to protect it from the wind. It had not worked. The cabin was a skeleton. The roof had caved in. One wall was gone, scattered by the wind. The windows were empty holes. The wind howled through it, a lonely, mourning sound. This was her legacy, a ruin. "All right, Papa," she said, her voice swallowed by the wind. "Let's get to work." She spent the first day just clearing the debris. It was backbreaking. She dragged charred timbers, pulled up rotten floorboards, and wrestled with the heavy, collapsed sections of the sod roof. Her hands, softened by 5 years of mending and laundry work in Laramie, were raw and bleeding within an hour. That night, she slept on the ground under her bedroll, her saddle for a pillow, the little derringer in her hand. The wind whispered in the tall grass, and every whisper sounded like boots. Every rustle sounded like Sheriff Mays making good on his threat. She did not sleep. The second day, she found a rattlesnake coiled in the wreckage of the hearth. Her heart stopped. She drew her pistol and shot its head clean off. She skinned it and cooked it over her fire that night. It tasted like defiance. She was alone, utterly. The sky was too big, the silence too heavy. This was what Mays had wanted. He wanted the land, the wind, and the loneliness to break her. On the third morning, she found it. She had gone to the creek to haul water. When she returned, straining under the weight of the 2 heavy buckets, she stopped. On the flat stone she used as a doorstep, there was a small stack of cut firewood, not kindling, but good, solid pieces of pine, neatly split. Beside it was a canvas-wrapped parcel. Her hand went to her pistol. She scanned the horizon, the rocks, the trees. Nothing, just the wind. Slowly, she knelt. She opened the parcel. Inside was a half loaf of fresh bread, still faintly warm, and a small tin of salve. She stared at it. Pity? A trap. She touched the bread. It was real. Someone had come while she was at the creek and left it. She ate the bread like a wolf, her hands shaking. It was the first good thing she had tasted in days. She put the salve on her blistered palms. It stung, then cooled. The next day, she found more. A good hammer, the handle worn smooth with use, and a small box of iron nails. The day after, a sack of flour and 3 smoked fish. Someone was watching her. Someone was helping her. She worked with a new fire. She squared the broken timbers, salvaged what she could. She was strong, but she was not strong enough. The main roof beam, the one that would support the new sod, was too heavy. She tried for 2 hours to lever it into place. It slipped, crashing down, nearly taking her hand with it. She sat on the dusty floor, gasping, tears of sheer, hot frustration blurring her vision. She would not cry. She would not. "You're lifting with your back," a low voice said. Clara sprang to her feet, spinning, the pistol in her hand before she was even standing. Jackson Reed stood just outside the cabin wall, not 10 feet away. He held a hammer in his hand, the twin of the one she had been left. He was not looking at her, but at the fallen beam. "You try to muscle it. You'll just tear something," he said, as if continuing a conversation. "What are you doing here?" Clara demanded, her voice sharp. The gun was still pointed at his chest. He finally looked at her. His gray eyes were calm. He did not seem to notice the gun. "Was it you?" she asked, lowering the barrel slightly. "The wood, the food." He gave a small shrug, then looked back at the beam. "You're going to need help putting the roof on." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. Clara stared at him. The town's ghost. The man the other men feared. He had a reputation. She knew. A story about a sister and bandits, and a kind of justice the law never offered. He was as much an outcast as she was. Her pride screamed at her. "No, I can do it alone. I do not need a man. I do not need anyone." He was a danger. Having him here would only make the rumors worse, make the sheriff angrier. He waited, his patience as vast as the prairie. He did not push, did not plead. He just stood there, holding his hammer, waiting for her to see the truth. She could not lift that beam. She could not build this roof. Not alone. She looked at the heavy timber, then at him. She took a slow breath, the wind pulling a strand of hair across her face. "All right," she said, her voice quiet. She slid the pistol back into her holster. Jackson Reed nodded once. He walked past her into the ruin of the cabin, sized up the beam, and said, "We'll need a better brace. Find me a good, solid piece of oak." Clara watched him for a moment, this quiet stranger who saw her. Then she turned and went to find the wood. She let him stay. The work was a silent language. He would lift the end of a timber, grunt, and she would know to slide the supporting stone underneath. She would hold a plank steady, her knuckles white, and he would drive the nails in 3 precise, powerful strokes. Set, drive, sink. They did not talk. The wind did it for them. A constant, high, lonesome moan that stole the breath and dried the sweat on their faces. Jackson Reed worked with a grim economy of motion. He never wasted a step, never swung a hammer twice when once would do. He seemed to draw his energy not from food or rest, but from some deep, cold well of purpose. Clara worked to prove she was not weak. She hauled stones until her shoulders burned. She learned to use the saw, her arm aching with the repetitive pull and push, refusing to let him take over. She was his match in stubbornness, if not in strength. In the beginning, her pride was a sharp, brittle thing. "I can manage that," she snapped, reaching for a heavy bucket. He just looked at her, then at the bucket, and took it anyway. "You can manage it once. We have to manage it 50 times before sundown." She hated that he was right. She watched him, wary. He was a man, and she knew what men wanted, what they took. But Jackson looked at her hands, her boots, her work. He never looked at her body. His gaze was impersonal, assessing, like a rancher checking a fence line for weaknesses. It was, she realized with a jolt, the first time a man had looked at her without weighing her value, and it was more unsettling than any leer. At night, they sat on opposite sides of the small fire. He had built his own rough lean-to, a respectful 50 yards from where she slept. He would clean his tools, sharpen his knife, or just stare into the flames. The silence stretched, tight and thin. She was the first to break it. She could not stand the quiet. "You do not talk much, Mr. Reed," she said one evening, poking the fire. He looked up. His gray eyes caught the light. "No, ma'am." "Why not?" He seemed to consider this, as if it were a genuine question he had never thought to ask himself. Most folks talk to hear their own voice. I find it wears a man out. "And I talk too much?" she bristled, her defenses rising. "You talk enough," he said, and went back to the fire. She found herself wanting to provoke him, to get some kind of reaction. "You know what they say about me in town. Why are you here? You think helping me will make them forget what they say about you?" He stopped whittling a piece of wood. He laid the knife down. "I do not care what they say, Miss McAllister." "Everyone says that. No one means it." "I mean it." She stood up, frustrated. "Then what do you want? People do not do things for free out here. You brought me food. You are building my house. You expect payment. Is that it? Because I have money, but not much." He looked at her, his face hard in the firelight. "I am not here for your money." "Then why?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Why help the town pariah? Why make yourself a target for Sheriff Mays? Why are you here?" He was quiet for a long time. The wind whistled over the half-built roof. "Because," he said, his voice low and rough, "you do not flinch when folks spit at you. I like that." Clara's breath caught. It was the simplest answer, and it was the last one she expected. It was not pity. It was not desire. It was respect. "That is all?" she whispered. He nodded. "Folks in Cedar Gap, they flinch. They see trouble. They look at their boots. They see a wrong. They cross the street. They let things happen." His voice changed. The dispassionate calm was gone. replaced by something cold and sharp as obsidian. They let a stage get hit, not 5 miles from town. 3 men, they took the strongbox, and they took other things. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "I had a sister," Jackson said, staring into the dark beyond the fire. "Bethany. She was 17. She was on that stage." He did not need to say the words. Clara understood the shape of the violence. She had felt the beginning of it herself, in that barn. "The driver made it to town, raised the alarm," Jackson continued. "Sheriff Mays, he was just a deputy then. He got a posse together. They rode out. They found her on the road, still breathing." He picked up the piece of wood and the knife, his knuckles white. "They rode right past her. Said they had to catch the trail while it was hot. They left her there." "My God," Clara breathed. "She died, alone, in the dust." He spat the words. "Mays and his men came back 2 days later. Said the trail went cold in the rocks. Said it was a tragedy, but nothing to be done." Clara watched as he drew the blade down the wood, shaving off a long, thin curl. "And you?" she asked, already knowing. "My trail did not go cold," he said. "I found them, in a box canyon near the border. All 3. The fire crackled. He had just confessed to 3 killings. He had laid his life in her hands. She looked at this man, this ghost, and she felt no fear at all. She felt a terrible, shared understanding. "That is why they are afraid of you," she said. "That is why," he agreed. "You did what the law would not." "I did what was right." He tested the edge of the blade with his thumb. "The town. They do not like being reminded of what they let happen. They do not like looking at me. It is easier to call me a killer and a ghost than to call themselves cowards." He looked up, his gaze pinning her. "You are not a coward, Miss McAllister. You shot Randolph Eaton. You rode back into this town. You are rebuilding this cabin. You do not flinch." He went back to his whittling. The conversation was over. They worked. The cabin walls rose. The roof, the one he said she needed help with, took shape. It was made of salvaged timber and thick new sod, heavy enough to turn the wind. It was not just a ruin anymore. It was a shelter. The shared work and the shared secret eased the space between them. The silence was different now, companionable. She found herself talking, filling the quiet, but not with sarcasm. She told him about her father, about his belief in this land. She told him about the 5 years in Laramie, working as a seamstress, saving every penny, the shame sticking to her like mud. He listened. He never interrupted. He just listened, and his listening was a kind of comfort. One night, she was cooking rabbit stew over the fire. It was thin, and she had used too much salt. She was tired, and she spilled some on the fire as she served it, hissing as the embers popped. "Damn it," she muttered, wiping her sooty hand on her pants. She handed him his plate. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and did not change expression. "Well?" she asked, defensive again. "It is terrible, I know." He took another bite. "It is salty. I am a terrible cook." "You are," he agreed, his voice flat. She stared at him, expecting malice, or at least a smirk, but his face was perfectly serious. It was so blunt, so honest, that a bubble of laughter rose in her throat. She tried to swallow it, but it escaped. A short, rusty bark. He looked up, surprised. The absurdity of it struck her. Here they were, the town killer and the town whore, rebuilding a ruin in the middle of nowhere, eating terrible, salty rabbit. She laughed again, a real laugh this time, full and clear. It felt strange in her own chest, like an echo from a life she had forgotten. A slow smile cracked Jackson's face. It was a rare, unused thing. The lines around his eyes softened. He let out a low chuckle, a sound like dry leaves skittering over rock. They both stopped, looking at each other over the fire. The shared sound of it, the simple warmth, was more intimate than any touch. It hung in the air, surprising them both. Clara cleared her throat, her face suddenly hot. "Well, at least it is not Snake." Jackson's smile stayed for a moment longer. "That is true," he said, and they ate their stew in a new, easier silence. The peace was not meant to last. She needed supplies, nails, glass for the one window, more flour. Jackson offered to go. "No," she said, her pride returning. "They will think I am hiding behind you. This is my fight." "It is our fight now, Clara," he said, using her first name. It sounded strange. "Then we ride in together," she said. It was a mistake, or perhaps it was the only way. Riding into Cedar Gap beside Jackson Reed was like walking into a saloon carrying a lit stick of dynamite. The whispers did not just follow them, they preceded them. If the town hated her before, they despised her now. Living with a man, unmarried, and not just any man, but Jackson Reed. She had been bold, now she was a harlot. At the mercantile, Mr. Hemphill served her, but he would not look at her. He counted her coins as if they were contaminated. "That will be all," she said, her voice tight. "I am sure it will be," a voice drawled from behind her. Sheriff Willard Mays filled the doorway. His eyes flicked from Clara to Jackson, who stood just outside, his hands loose at his sides. Well, Mays said, his voice loud enough for the entire store to hear. "Miss McAllister, I see you found yourself a ranch hand after all." The men loafing by the stove snickered. "I am just buying supplies." "Sheriff," Clara said, hefting her sack. "Oh, I am sure you are," Mays said, stepping aside to block her exit. "A woman living alone. Well, not alone, is it? Living out there with him." He jerked his chin at Jackson. "I suppose he offers a certain protection for a price." Clara's face went white hot. "You are a filthy-minded coward." "Sheriff." "Am I?" Mays laughed. "I am just speaking the truth. You are shacking up with a known murderer, leading him astray. I hear poisoning his mind against the good people of this town. Seducing him, though heavens knows what he sees in spoiled goods." "Climatic," she slapped him. The sound was sharp as a gunshot in the quiet store. Mays's head snapped back. His face turned a dark, mottled red. He raised his hand. Before it could fall, Jackson was there. He had not moved fast, but he was suddenly present, his body blocking Clara's. His hand was not on his gun. It was on the sheriff's wrist, holding the raised hand in a grip that made the larger man wince. "You will not," Jackson said. It was not a threat. It was a fact. Mays tried to rip his hand away, but Jackson's grip was like a steel trap. The sheriff was a bully, but he was not a fighter. Not like this. "You take your hand off me, Reed," Mays hissed, his authority crumbling. "That is assaulting an officer." "You were assaulting a lady," Jackson said, his voice deadly quiet. He squeezed. Mays gasped, his knees buckling slightly. "Jackson, no," Clara said, grabbing his arm. "Not here. It is what he wants." Jackson looked at her. He saw the plea in her eyes. He looked back at Mays, his eyes full of contempt, and shoved the sheriff's hand back at him. "You keep your lies and your hands to yourself, Willard," Jackson said. He grabbed the sack of supplies. "Let's go, Clara." They walked out, every eye in the store following them. Mays, rubbing his wrist, watched them ride away, his face a mask of pure, humiliated hatred. The ride back was tense. The lies were out. The battle line was drawn. That night, Jackson seemed distant. He checked the perimeter of the cabin 3 times before he settled by the fire. "He will not let this go," Clara said. "No," Jackson said. "What he said about me seducing you. They are words, Clara, just wind." "Not to me," she said. "It is the same wind that drove me out 5 years ago." He looked at her. "It is not the same. You are not alone this time." He said it so simply. She held on to those words as she went to her bedroll. The fire came 2 days later. It was dusk. Clara had gone to the creek to wash the grime from her face and fetch water for their meal. Jackson was on the new roof, hammering the last of the sod shingles into place. She was just starting back up the shallow rise when she smelled it. Not wood smoke, kerosene. A shout, not hers, Jackson's. She dropped the buckets and ran. When she cleared the rise, her world stopped. The cabin, their cabin, was a column of orange flame. The new roof, the one they had just finished, was already collapsing inward. "Jackson!" she screamed. He was not in the cabin. He was at the small lean-to they had built for her mare and the supplies. It, too, was burning. He burst out of the smoke, choking, pulling her terrified horse by the reins. The mare's eyes were wide, rolling in panic. "Get her clear!" he yelled, shoving the reins at Clara. He turned to go back in. "No!" Clara screamed. "Jackson, leave it. It is just things." "It is your life," he roared back, and plunged back into the burning lean-to. She heard a horrible crack. The main beam of the lean-to was giving way. She saw him through the smoke, throwing the sacks of flour and their bedrolls clear. "Jackson, get out!" The roof collapsed. He stumbled out an instant before it fell. A human torch. His shirt was on fire. He fell to his knees, beating at the flames on his arm and shoulder. Clara ran to him, her heart in her throat. She used her own skirt to smother the last of the flames on his sleeve, her hands shaking so badly she could barely think. He was alive. He was gasping, coughing up black smoke. But he was alive. The cabin was gone. The lean-to was gone. All their work turned to ash and smoke, drifting up into the purple sky. She helped him to the creek, away from the heat. He sat heavily on the bank, his head in his hands. They came from the rocks," he rasped, his voice raw. "2 of them, torches and kerosene. I was on the roof, did not see them until—" "Hush," she said. "It is done. I tried the supplies. You saved my horse," she said, her voice trembling. "You saved the food." She looked at his arm. In the fading light, she could see the damage. His sleeve was gone. His left forearm and part of his shoulder were a terrible landscape of red, weeping burns. "Oh, Jackson," she whispered. She tore strips from her petticoat, the same one she had used to clean his arm before. She soaked them in the cold creek water. Her hands would not stop shaking. "This will hurt," she said. "It hurts already," he grunted. She laid the wet cloth on the burns. He hissed, a sharp intake of breath, but he did not move, did not pull away. He just watched her, his face pale and strained under the soot. She bandaged him as gently as she could. They were ruined. They had nothing but a horse, 2 sacks of flour, and the clothes on their backs. They were right back where they started. No, worse. The wind was picking up. They had no shelter. "He won them," she whispered, her hands falling to her lap. "Mace won." Jackson reached out with his good hand and touched her chin, forcing her to look at him. "He burned wood. Clara, that is all. He did not burn us. We are still here." That night, they slept under the stars by the smoking ruin of their home. She gave him her bedroll. She sat up, her rifle across her lap, and kept watch. He was restless, moaning softly in his sleep. The pain was deep. She watched him, this quiet man, this killer. He had walked through fire for her supplies, for her. All her life, men had tried to take from her. Her reputation, her body, her land, her home. This man, he gave his time, he gave his strength, he gave his safety. In the pale moonlight, she saw the lines of pain around his mouth. She saw the scar at his temple. She saw the man the town called a ghost. Her hand, of its own accord, reached out. It trembled. She was so afraid. Afraid of the night, afraid of Maze, afraid of this strange, new feeling in her chest. She laid her hand flat on his chest, over his heart. She felt the steady, slow beat, solid, real. A whisper escaped her, spoken only to the wind and the ruins. "Why are you the only man who makes me feel safe?" She thought he was asleep. She expected no answer. His good hand came up and covered hers, trapping it gently against his heart. His grip was warm, and it stopped her trembling. Her breath hitched. He opened his eyes. They were not cloudy with sleep or pain. They were clear, and they were watching her. He had heard. He looked at her hand on his chest, then at her face. The silence stretched, filled only by the wind moving through the ashes. He said, his voice rough, "Because you deserve to be—" He did not let go. He just held her hand there, flat against his heart. A silent promise in the dark. And for the first time in 5 years, Clara McAllister closed her eyes and was not afraid. The fire had taken everything and given them one thing. The ashes were cold, but the space between them was not. They had nothing left but the mare, 2 singed sacks of flour, and the clothes on their backs. They had to go back. Letting the fire drive them away would be the same as letting Sheriff Mays win. "You should not go," Jackson said. His voice was raw from the smoke. His left arm was bound tightly to his chest with strips of Clara's petticoat, the burns underneath a landscape of raw pain. "We need canvas," Clara said, her voice flat. She was scouring a scorched pot in the creek, her knuckles raw. "And more nails? And salve? I am not sleeping on the ground again, and neither are you." "They will be waiting. Clara, after this, they will be—" "They will be what?" She stood up, wiping her wet, sooty hands on her torn skirt. "More hateful. They burned us out. What is left? Hanging?" She looked at the ruin of the cabin. "I will not run. Not from him, not from them." She turned and looked at him. He was pale beneath the grime. "You stay. You are hurt. I will take the mare." "No," he said, the word final. He stood up, his legs steady. "If you ride, I ride. You are in no condition. And you are in no condition to face them alone." He flexed his good right hand. "I can still sit a horse. I can still stand beside you." The ride into Cedar Gap was a torment. If they had been ghosts before, they were omens now. They were the town's collective sin, riding in on a tired roan, covered in ash and soot. Clara's hair was wild, her father's hat set low and defiant. Jackson sat stiffly, his face a mask of pain, his burned arm held close. The stares were no longer whispers. They were open, hostile, and edged with a new, dark energy. They were not just looking at the town scandal. They were looking at the town's chosen victims. Clara kept her chin high. She focused on the door of the mercantile. She felt Jackson's presence beside her, solid as an oak. He did not look at the townsfolk. He looked at her, and then at the rooftops, watching, always watching. At the mercantile, Mr. Hemphill saw them, and his face soured. "I am not serving you," he said, his arms crossed. "I have money," Clara said, placing her coins on the counter. "I do not want your money. Your trouble. Clara McAllister, the town has had enough of your trouble. You and him—" He spat on the floor near Jackson's boot. "You brought the fire on yourself, bedding down with a killer." Jackson's good hand tensed. Mr. Hemphill," Clara said, her voice deadly cold. "I need 2 canvas tarps, a box of roofing nails, and a tin of burn salve. You will sell them to me, or I will stand on this boardwalk and tell every customer who approaches just how Sheriff Mays threatened me in his office. I will tell them how he offered to supervise my land. I wonder how Mrs. Hemphill will enjoy that story." Hemphill's face went from sour to pale. He knew. They all knew. He looked past her. at the men starting to gather on the boardwalk, drawn by the confrontation. He looked at Jackson's one good hand, resting near the butt of his pistol. He grabbed the items, his movements jerky, and shoved them into a sack. He swept the coins off the counter. "Get out," he hissed, "and do not come back." "We will be back," Clara said, taking the sack. They stepped back onto the boardwalk. The small crowd of loafers outside the saloon across the street had grown. Jeb Parsons was there, his face still bruised from Jackson's fist. He was flanked by 2 other men, and they were drunk. The whispers were loud, meant to be heard. "Look at 'em, filthy, like animals." "Heard she's a witch," a woman muttered from the dry goods store. "Called the fire down herself." "She is a harlot," another man said. "Heard she did things for him to make him stay." "Thief!" Parsons called out, his voice slurring. "Heard you stole that horse you're riding. Read!" Jackson did not slow, his hand on Clara's back, urging her toward their horse. "Hey!" Parsons shouted, emboldened by his friends. He stepped off the saloon porch into their path. "I am talking to you. Killer!" "Go home, Jeb," Jackson said, his voice flat. "I ain't going nowhere. You think you are something, don't you? Hiding behind her skirts? Or is it in her skirts?" The other men laughed. "Jackson, let's go," Clara said, pulling on his good arm. "Yeah, read. Listen to your woman." Parsons sneered. He took a step closer, his eyes raking over Clara. He was close enough for her to smell the sour whiskey on his breath. "You know, McAllister, we all thought you were just too bold for your own good, but you are not bold." He spat a stream of tobacco juice that landed inches from her boot. "You are just filthy bold. A whore who lays with a killer 'cause no decent man will have you." Clara flinched, the words striking her like a physical blow. Jackson stopped. The street went utterly silent. He did not move fast. He simply transferred the sack of supplies to his bad arm, tucking it against his chest. He turned his body, shielding Clara. "You should not have said that. Jeb," he said. Parsons, too drunk to see the death in Jackson's eyes, balled his fists. "Or what? You gonna hit me again, one arm?" Jackson's right hand was a blur. It was not a punch. He grabbed Parsons by the throat, slamming him back against the hitching post. The wood cracked. Parsons's eyes bulged, his hands clawing at Jackson's wrist. Jackson did not hit him. He just squeezed. With his other hand, the one attached to the burned arm, he ignored the searing pain and drew his knife. He pressed the blade up under Parsons's chin. "Jackson!" Clara screamed. The town froze. This was not a fist fight. This was a killing. "Say it again," Jackson whispered, his voice vibrating with a coldness that was more terrifying than rage. "Say it!" Parsons made a wet, gagging sound. His face was turning purple. "Jackson! Stop! You will hang!" Clara clawed at his shoulder, his good arm. "He is not worth it. They want this. Mays wants this." She grabbed his right wrist, the one holding the knife. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Please, do not leave me. Do not let them take you." For a terrible second, he did not move. He was somewhere else, somewhere dark, where his sister had been left in the dust. He was in the box canyon. Then he looked at Clara. He saw her face, streaked with soot and tears, her eyes wide with terror. Not terror of him, terror for him. The killing light faded. He released his grip. Parsons slumped to the ground, choking and sobbing. Jackson shoved the knife back into its sheath. He looked at the silent, horrified crowd. "He lives because she asked," Jackson said, his voice ragged. He grabbed the sack of supplies. "Let's go." He all but pushed her onto the mare and swung up behind her, his bad arm tight around her waist. They rode out of Cedar Gap, the silence of the town a palpable thing at their backs. They did not speak on the ride home. Clara trembled against his chest, the adrenaline draining away, leaving her cold and sick. He held her, his grip the only solid thing in a world that was trying to tear them apart. That night, the wind was bitter. The ashes of the cabin offered no warmth. They strung up one canvas tarp against the half-burned wall, creating a crude, three-sided shelter. It was barely enough to break the wind. Clara tended to his arm. The fight had torn the bandages, and the burns were weeping again. He sat stoic as she cleaned and rewrapped it, his jaw tight. "You almost killed him," she said quietly, her hands shaking. "He deserved it," Jackson said, his voice a low growl. "I know." She tied off the bandage. "That is not the point. If you did, Mays would have had his noose around your neck by morning, and I would be alone." He looked at her, his gray eyes searching her face in the dim light of the campfire. "I will not let them speak of you that way." "Let them speak," she said, her voice fierce. "Words are just wind. Jackson, you taught me that, but a rope is real. I need you here, not brave, not righteous, just here." The cold was seeping into their bones. The single bedroll they had saved was not enough. Clara looked at the bedroll, then at him. Her father's words came back to her. "Share warmth or you die." "We cannot sleep apart," she said, her voice practical, trying to hide the tremor in it. "We will freeze. We have to share the blankets." Jackson hesitated. This was a different line, a line more dangerous than the one in town. "Do not be a fool," she said, her old sharpness returning. "It is just warmth, that is all." He nodded, stiff. They lay down on the hard ground, under the rough quilt and the tarp. It was agonizing. They lay back to back, every nerve aware of the person just inches away. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, the way he tried to keep his injured arm from brushing against her. They did not touch. They just let the shared heat build in the small, dark space. But sleep was hard. The wind tore at the canvas, sounding like screams. The next night was the same. Exhausted from clearing rubble, they fell into the bedrolls. The awareness was still there, but so was the bone-deep weariness. On the third night, a storm broke. Rain lashed the canvas, and the temperature plummeted. Clara was dreaming, a tangled, terrible dream of Randolph Eaton and the smell of hay and whiskey, of flames and Sheriff Mays's laughing face. She cried out, a small, choked sound, and woke up trembling, her heart pounding. The rain was a deafening roar on the tarp. It was pitch black. She felt him stir beside her. He did not turn. He did not say a word. In the dark, his good hand moved, searching. It found hers, where it was clenched in the blanket. He did not grab it. He simply laid his hand over hers. She went still. His fingers, calloused and strong, slowly uncurled her fist. He laced his fingers through hers. It was not a violation. It was an anchor. It was the same as his words in the dark, because you deserve to be. Her breath left her in a long, shaky sigh. She turned her hand, gripping his. She was not alone in the dark. That was all. She let him hold it. That was all. And she fell back asleep, the sound of the rain softer now. They had been working for a week, rebuilding the cabin walls. When Sheriff Mays returned, he was not alone. He had 4 deputies with him, their rifles unslung. "Jackson Reed," Mays called out, his voice smooth and triumphant. "You are under arrest." Clara dropped her hammer. "For what? You cannot arrest him for what Parsons said." "Oh, this is not about Mr. Parsons," Mays said, swinging down from his horse. He held up a piece of paper. "This is a warrant for the theft of Mr. Hemphill's prize stallion, stolen 3 nights ago, the night of the storm." "That is impossible," Clara said, moving to stand in front of Jackson. "He was here, with me. He has not left this land since the fire." Mays smirked, his eyes dropping to the shared bedroll under the tarp. "Oh, I'm sure he was with you, Miss McAllister. A woman will lie for a man she is attached to." but his alibi is a little thin, especially since we found tracks." "What tracks?" Jackson said, his voice low. "Horse tracks, leading from Hemphill's stable right out toward this canyon. And look what we found." A deputy held up a length of rope. "That is a specialized knot, a cattleman's knot, just like the ones you use, reed." It was a frame, clean and simple. "You are a liar," Clara spat. "And you are obstructing justice." Mays nodded to his men. "Take him." "No!" Clara grabbed for her rifle, but a deputy was faster, knocking it aside. Jackson did not move. He knew if he fought, they would shoot him. It was a trap. "Clara, stop!" His voice was iron. "Do not give him the excuse." He looked at her, his eyes conveying a silent message. "Do not let them hurt you." He put his good hand out, and they tied it. "He will hang for this." "Reed," Mays said, his voice soft. "Horse theft is a hanging offense, and with your reputation, no judge will doubt it." He mounted his horse and looked down at Clara. "I will be back tomorrow, ma'am, to discuss the land. Seems you are all alone again. For good, this time." Clara watched them ride away. Jackson sitting stiff and straight on a deputy's horse. The fury in her chest was so cold, so pure, it burned away her tears. That night, the storm returned, as if summoned by her rage. The wind howled, and the rain turned to sleet. She did not sleep. She sat in the dark, her rifle across her knees, and she thought. At dawn, she saddled the mare. She rode into Cedar Gap, the wind and rain lashing her face. She was soaked to the bone, her hat dripping, her face a mask of fury. She looked like a vengeful spirit. She slammed the door of the sheriff's office open. The young deputy, Pike, yelped, spilling his coffee. Mays was not there. "I am here to see Jackson Reed," she demanded. "No visitors," Pike stammered. "Sheriff's orders, especially not you." "He needs medicine," Clara lied, her voice hard. "His burns, they are infected. If he gets fever sick from your neglect, I will tell the circuit judge." I cannot." Clara threw her father's worn wallet on the desk. It was the last of her money. "That is $25. It is everything I have. You take it. You go get a drink. You turn your back for 5 minutes." She leaned in. "Or I swear to God, I will burn this office down around your ears. And I do not care if you are in it." Pike looked at the money. He looked at her eyes. He believed her. He grabbed the coins. 5 minutes, he whispered, his hand shaking. "And I did not see you." He unlocked the cell-block door and went to the front window. His back to her. Jackson was at the bars of the back cell, as if he had been waiting. His face was bruised. "Clara," he said, his voice urgent. "You have to ride out. Get to Cheyenne. You are not safe." "I am not leaving you," she said, gripping the cold iron bars. "He framed you. He is going to hang you." "I know." "Who did it, Jackson? Who really stole the horse?" "Does not matter." "It matters to me," she cried. "Who?" He thought for a moment. "Hemphill's stallion. It has to be Silas Croft. He works the stables. He owes money all over town. He is stupid enough for Mays to use." "Silas Croft." She nodded. "I will get you out." "Clara, you cannot." She surged forward, pressing her face to the bars. "I promise you." He met her. His good hand came through the bars, tangling in her soaking hair. He pulled her flush against the iron. Their kiss was desperate, frantic. It tasted of rain and rust and fear. It was a promise, and a claim, and a goodbye, all at once. She pulled back, her forehead resting against the bars, her breath shaking. "I promise," she whispered again. "Time's up," Pike called. She ran out into the storm. She did not go to Silas Croft. She went to the stable. Croft was not there, but the stallion was. It had been found that morning and returned to its stall. Clara looked at the horse. She looked at the new rope on its halter. And she saw it. A fresh brand, small and half hidden under the mane. It was not Hemphill's brand. She went to the saloon. Silas Croft was in the back, spending his new money. She sat down across from him. "Silas." He jumped. "Miss McAllister, what? What do you want?" "You stole the horse," she said, not a question. "That is crazy talk. They caught Reed." "They caught Reed because you left a false trail. But you are a fool. Silas, you did not just steal the horse. You sold it, and then you stole it back. Did not you?" His face went white. "I saw the brand," Clara said. "The Circle that is Redding's brand, over in the next county. You stole Hemphill's horse, sold it to Redding, and then Mays made you find it to frame Jackson. The only problem is, Redding is a hard man, and he is good friends with Judge Parker." She leaned in. "So, here's what happens. Judge Parker arrives tomorrow. You can let Jackson hang, and I will ride straight to Redding and tell him his new stallion is back in Hemphill's stable. And when Redding tells the judge, who do you think hangs higher? Jackson, for a theft he did not do, or you, for horse theft, fraud, and conspiracy with a corrupt sheriff." Silas was shaking. "Mays, he said he would protect me." "Mays is protecting himself. You go to him. You tell him I know about Redding. You tell him if Jackson Reed is not free by sundown. My first stop is Judge Parker, and my second is the Redding Ranch." She stood up. "Choose Silas." Clara waited on the boardwalk across from the jail, sitting on a bench in the cold, wet air. She waited for 2 hours. At 4 o'clock, Silas Croft ran into the sheriff's office. 10 minutes later, he ran out. An hour after that, the jail door opened. Jackson walked out. He was stiff, his face grim. Mays stood in the doorway. Clara walked across the street. "You are a clever woman, Miss McAllister." Mays spat, his face a mask of hatred. "Too clever for your own good. I just do not like liars. Sheriff, you won. Fine." He pointed a thick finger at her. "But this is not over. You are still in my town. You are still on land that the bank wants. One more slip, one, and I will not need a false charge." He leaned close. "Next time, it is the noose, and I will tie it myself." Clara did not flinch. She looked at Jackson. "Let's go home." They rode back in silence. The storm had broken, leaving the air clean and cold. The sky was a pale, bruised blue. There were no words for what had passed between them. The arrest, the desperation, the kiss, the threat of death. They reached the ruin of their cabin. They were still homeless. They were still targets. Jackson dismounted, his movements pained. He tended to the mare. Clara began to rebuild the fire, her hands trembling now that it was over. He came to the fire. He stood behind her. She froze, a piece of kindling in her hand. His good hand settled on her shoulder. She did not startle. She did not pull away. She leaned back, just a fraction, into his touch. Her body ached with weariness. "You came for me," he said, his voice rough. "I promised," she whispered. He turned her around, his hand gentle on her shoulder. He looked at her face, at the rain-washed streaks of soot, at the exhaustion in her eyes, at the fierce, unbroken line of her mouth. This was not the barn. This was not a violation. This was not the leering of the sheriff or the sneers of the town. This was just Jackson, and he was safe. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss from the jail. It was slow. It was hesitant. It was a question. It tasted of rain and smoke and a profound, bone-deep relief. She kissed him back. Her hands, which had fought and bribed and held firm, came up to rest on his chest, over his heart. He pulled back, his gray eyes searching hers. No words. He turned, picked up the single, rough quilt, and carried it to the driest spot of ground, under the shelter of the canvas and the half-burned wall. He laid it out. He looked at her. It was her choice. Clara walked to him. She stood before him, and for the first time in her life, she was not afraid. That night, under the rough quilt, they came together. It was not a fire, it was a slow, quiet warmth in the ashes. It was clumsy and gentle and honest. It was the fumbling of her worn buttons, the sharp intake of his breath as she accidentally brushed his burned arm. It was the scratch of the wool on her skin and the solid weight of him, real and alive. It was not passion, it was survival. It was two broken, lonely people, driven to the edge, finally finding a place to rest. It was quiet, like a prayer whispered in the dark, a desperate hope that they were, at last, no longer alone. Spring came to Wyoming not as a gentle thaw, but as a battle. It arrived on a harsh wind that smelled of distant rain and melting snow. The ground, iron-hard for months, cracked open. Pale green shoots, tough and defiant, pushed their way through the mud. In the distance, thunder rolled across the plains, a low growl of promise. The land was beginning to bloom, and Clara worked it with a vengeance. The shared bedroll, the quiet nights, and the desperate fight for Jackson's freedom had forged something new between them. The cabin, rebuilt with stubborn hands and scavenged timber, was no longer a ruin. It was a home. It was small, just one room, but the roof held, and the wind, for the most part, stayed outside. Clara moved with a fierce energy, as if she could drive her anger and her hope directly into the soil. She was not just planting, she was claiming. Every row she hoed, every seed she dropped into the damp earth, was an act of defiance. This was her land, her body, her life. She would not let Mays or his shadows take it. Jackson's arm had healed, leaving a puckered, angry scar from shoulder to elbow. He never complained, but Clara would see him wince when he lifted something heavy. He was building a corral. He spent days cutting lodgepole pine, setting the posts deep, lashing the rails with wet rawhide that dried tight as iron. It was a slow, solid thing. The fence was a boundary, a circle of safety in the vast, open wild. It was an act of faith. It said they were staying. It said there would be horses. It said there would be a future. They fell into a rhythm, up before the sun, which rose cold and red. Coffee boiled over the fire, thick and bitter. They would share the cup, their hands brushing, then work. They worked until their backs screamed and their hands were raw. They seldom spoke. They did not need to. Their dreams were quiet. They were not spoken of in grand terms. They were hidden in the practical. "Next year, we should try for wheat," Clara said one evening, rubbing salve into her palms. "We will need a better plow," Jackson replied, his eyes on the fire. "And a mule." "Two," he said. That was all, but it meant next year. It meant a life. He would sometimes stop his work, watching her as she bent over the garden, her father's hat shadowing her face. He would watch the way the wind pulled at her skirt, the determined set of her jaw. He had seen her at her most broken, and he had seen her fight a town to save him. The woman they called filthy bold was, to him, the only honest thing he had ever known. One evening, when the sun was bleeding purple into the hills, he came to her. He had washed, and his hair was damp. He took her hand, his own calloused and clean. "Come with me," he said. He led her away from the cabin, up the long, grassy ridge that overlooked their small valley. The wind was stronger here, and it felt clean. It pulled her hair loose from its pins. At the very crest of the ridge stood a single, weathered pine. It had been struck by lightning once. A long, pale scar ran down its trunk, but it still lived. Beneath its sparse branches was a rectangle of stones. It was a grave. Clara stopped. She looked at the stones, Then at Jackson's face. His jaw was set, his gray eyes fixed on the simple marker. "This is it," he said, his voice rough. "This is where I put her." He knelt, not in prayer, but just to be closer. He ran his hand over the largest stone, pushing aside a small weed. "Bethany, my sister." Clara had known the story, but she had not known this, the physical fact of it. The quiet loneliness of this spot struck her deep in the chest. She loved the wind," Jackson said, his voice quiet, as if speaking to himself. "She always hated the dust in town. She said she wanted to live up high, where she could see things coming, where the air was clean." He swallowed, his throat working. "She was supposed to meet me here. We were going to go to Oregon. Start over. I was late. I was 2 days late." He had not told her that part. The guilt, the self-recrimination, was a weight he had carried for a decade. "Oh, Jackson," Clara whispered. It was all she could say. "I found her after I brought her here, to the tree she liked." He touched the scarred bark. "I buried her myself. Then I went and found those men." Clara looked at the small pile of stones, at the vast, empty sky, at this man who had carried so much death, so much grief, all by himself. He had been a ghost not just to the town, but to himself. She knelt beside him in the tall grass. She did not say it was not his fault. She did not say he was a good man. The wind tore the words away. Instead, she wept. She wept for Bethany, a girl she never knew. She wept for the brother who had been too late. She wept for the violence of this land, for the cruelty of men like Mays and Parsons and Eaton. She wept for the barn, and for the fire, and for the jail cell. Jackson turned. He saw her shoulders shaking, her face buried in her hands. He had brought her here to show her his deepest wound, and she was bleeding for him. He reached out and pulled her to him. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder, and sobbed. She held on to him, not for comfort, but as if to hold him together. He held her back, his arms, one strong, one scarred, closed around her like a vice. He held her as if she were the only real thing in a world of ghosts. He pressed his face into her hair, his eyes shut tight. He did not make a sound, but his whole body trembled. They held each other on that ridge, under the lone tree, beside the grave of his sister. It was not like the quiet passion in their bed. It was deeper, rawer. It was two people who had been utterly alone, two people who had seen the worst of the world, and they were holding on, refusing to let go. They were not just lovers. They were survivors. The peace that followed was fragile, but it was real. They had shared everything. There were no more ghosts between them, until Mays sent new ones. It happened 2 weeks later. A heavy rain had fallen all morning, and the creek was running high and brown. Jackson was on the far side of the corral, mending a rail that had split. Clara had taken a bucket to the creek, needing water for their midday meal. The air was heavy, the world muffled by the sound of the rain and the rushing water. She was bending over the bank, dipping the bucket, when she felt it, a change in the air. The snap of a twig that was too sharp, too close. She straightened, her hand moving for the knife she now wore on her belt. She was too late. 3 men. They came out of the cottonwoods along the riverbank like shadows. They wore burlap masks, crude and terrifying, with holes cut for eyes. She had time for one breath, one scream. "Jackson!" Then they were on her. One grabbed her arms, pinning them behind her back. Another clamped a filthy hand over her mouth. She bit down, hard, tasting grime and blood. The man yelped, pulling his hand back. "The river," a muffled voice said. It was Jeb Parsons. She knew his voice. "Just like the boss said, scare her real good." They began to drag her toward the churning brown water. Clara fought. She was not the girl from the barn. She was not the woman from the saloon. She was a fury. She kicked, her boot connecting hard with a man's shin. He grunted and struck her across the face, a backhanded blow that sent stars exploding behind her eyes. But she was free of his grip for a second. She clawed at the man holding her arms. She tore her knife from its sheath and lunged, blind, desperate. The blade bit deep into something soft. A man screamed, a high, thin sound of pure agony. "He cut me! The witch cut me!" She saw the man, not Parsons, another one, clutching his thigh, dark blood welling between his fingers. The third man, the biggest, roared in rage. He did not try to grab her. He punched her, a solid, brutal blow to the stomach that drove the air from her lungs. She collapsed, gasping. He kicked her once, twice, in the ribs. "That is enough," Parsons yelled, his voice shaking. "She is just a woman. Mays said scare her, not kill her." "She cut Lem." "Leave her." Parsons grabbed the wounded man. "Lem, get him out of here." They crashed back into the woods, dragging their wounded friend. They left her crumpled in the mud, half in and half out of the creek, the rain washing the blood from her split lip into the brown water. She tried to call Jackson's name again, but only a small, broken sound came out. Then the world went dark. Jackson heard her scream. It was thin, torn away by the wind, but he heard it. He vaulted the half-finished corral fence. "Clara!" He ran toward the creek, his heart a cold stone in his chest. He saw the tracks in the mud first. 3 sets of boots, heavy and deep, and the signs of a struggle. The overturned bucket, a scrap of her dress, torn and muddy. "Clara!" he roared, drawing his pistol. He found her at the water's edge. She was a heap of wet calico and mud. She was so still. For one terrible moment, he thought of Bethany, left in the dust. "No," he whispered, "no." He fell to his knees beside her, his hands shaking as he reached for her throat. He felt it, a pulse, faint, but it was there. He saw her face. Her left eye was already swelling shut. Her lip was split, a dark line of blood trailing to her chin. He saw the muddy boot print on her dress, right over her ribs. A rage, cold and black and silent, filled him. It was so total, so absolute, it nearly stopped his heart. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing. He carried her home, back to the cabin, his boots sinking deep into the mud with every furious step. He did not feel the rain. He did not feel anything but the fragile weight in his arms and the killing cold in his soul. He laid her on their bed. He barred the door. He lit the lamp, his hands steady. He got the water, and the clean rags, and the whiskey. He refused to leave her side. He sat by the bed for hours, bathing her face, cleaning the mud from her hair. He was gentle, his rough hands moving with a surgeon's care, but his eyes never left her bruises. Every mark on her skin was a new debt, and he was a man who paid his debts. She woke late that night. She opened her one good eye and saw him sitting there, his face a mask carved from stone, the lamp highlighting the scars at his temple. "Jackson!" she whispered. Her voice was a croak. Her ribs screamed. He was there in an instant, holding a cup of water to her lips. "I am here. You are safe." They came from the woods," she breathed, wincing. "Parsons, I heard his voice." "I know," he said. She fought," Clara whispered, her eye closing. "I cut one, in the leg. I cut him." Jackson's hand tightened on the cup. "Good," he said. "Now rest. I will not leave you." He sat with her through the night. He watched her sleep, her breathing shallow and pained, and he stared at her face, her beautiful, brave face, now a ruin of purple and black. He was seeing his sister again. He was seeing everything he had ever loved, destroyed by cowards. Before dawn, he stood up. He checked his pistol. He took his knife. Clara stirred. "Where?" "To town. he said.
No, Jackson, do not,
she pleaded, trying to sit up, but the pain made her gasp. He gently pushed her back down.
They cannot do this. They cannot touch you. They cannot.
It is what Maze wants, she cried, her voice thin.
A trap. He wants you to kill. He wants you to hang.
I do not care what he wants, Jackson said, his voice dead.
I care,
she said, grabbing his good hand.
I care. Do not let them take the best of you. Do not let them make you like them. Please.
He looked at her hand, so small and bruised. Holding his, he looked at her face. He pulled his hand free. They will not touch you again, he promised, and he walked out the door, into the rain. He rode to town, not fast, but steady. He was not a man in a rage. He was an executioner. He did not go to the sheriff's office. He went to the saloon. It was early, but it was open. Jeb Parsons was not there, but Lem was. He was sitting at a back table, his leg propped up on a chair, a bottle of whiskey in front of him. Jackson saw the thick, bloody bandage wrapped around his thigh. Jackson walked to his table. Lem looked up, his eyes widened in pure, animal terror.
Reed, I did not.
Jackson grabbed the front of Lem's shirt with his left hand, the scarred one, and hauled him out of his chair. Lem screamed as his wounded leg buckled. Jackson dragged him out of the saloon, into the muddy alley, the same alley. He threw Lem against the wall. The man whimpered, sliding down into the mud.
Who else?
Jackson asked.
I do not know. Just Parsons.
Jackson drew his knife. He pressed the flat of the blade against Lem's cheek.
Who else? Just Parsons, and a man named Cole. I swear, that is all.
You put your hands on her, Jackson whispered. The rain was running down his face, into his eyes.
Maze made us. He said just to scare her. He said she was getting too bold. He paid us.
Jackson's hand, holding the knife, began to tremble. He saw Clara's face. He saw Bethany. You beat her.
She cut me,
Lem shrieked, tears of pain and fear streaming down his face.
She is a witch. She deserved.
That was the word. Jackson's calm broke. He reversed the knife, his hand gripping the blade, and he hit Lem in the face with the heavy pommel. Once, twice. He heard bone crack. He grabbed Lem by the throat, shoving him up against the wall, and raised the knife, the point aimed at his heart.
Jackson, no!
The voice was thin, reedy, but it cut through his rage. He turned. Clara was there, at the mouth of the alley. She was leaning against the wall, pale as death, soaked to the bone. She must have saddled the mare and followed him, half dead on her feet. She was holding her rifle, but it was pointed at the ground.
Jackson,
she panted, her ribs on fire.
Look at him. He is finished. Look at you.
He looked at the man he was holding. Lem was unconscious, bleeding, a pathetic, broken thing.
He hurt you?
Jackson choked out.
I know.
She took a staggering step closer.
And you stopped him. It is done. Do not become what they say you are. Do not let them take the best of you. Please. She was saving him. Again, her beaten and broken, saving him from himself. He looked at the knife in his hand. He looked at her. With a ragged groan, he threw Lem to the ground. The man was a heap of muddy rags. Jackson stood there, shaking, the knife in his hand, the rain washing the blood and mud away. He walked to her. He did not touch her. He just looked at what they had done to her. They rode back to the cabin in silence. That night, the breakdown came. Clara was lying in bed, her body a map of pain. Jackson sat on the floor, his back against the wall, staring at the small fire. He had cleaned his knife,
But he could still see the blood. He could still feel the man's throat in his hand. He had almost done it. He had almost become the animal they all said he was. He put his head in his hands, his shoulders starting to shake. A low, agonizing sound was torn from his chest. "Every time," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Every time I find something, every time I love something, it gets hurt." He was back on the ridge. "Bethany, she just wanted to see the mountains." He was back in the alley. "And you?" He was weeping, not loud, but in a way that was more terrible. Silent, racking sobs that shook his entire body. He had not cried for his sister. He had not cried when they arrested him. He cried now, for her, for his own failure to protect her. Clara, despite the fire in her ribs, slid off the bed. She knelt in front of him, her body screaming in protest. She put her hands on his. They were cold, trembling. "Jackson, look at me." He raised his head. His face was a wreck, his gray eyes flooded. She did not tell him it was all right. She did not tell him he was strong. She leaned forward, wincing, and kissed his scars. She kissed the old, white line at his temple. She kissed the puckered, burned flesh on his arm. She kissed his calloused, bloody knuckles. She accepted all of it, the pain, the violence, the past. "Then love me anyway," she whispered, her bruised lips brushing his. He stared at her, uncomprehending. "I am not afraid of getting hurt," she said, her voice finding its strength. "I have been hurt. I will be hurt again. We both will. This land, it hurts people. That is what it does." She put her hand on his cheek. "But I am afraid of not being loved. I'm afraid of being alone, in the dark, with no one to hold my hand. That is what Mays wants. He wants us to be too afraid to love each other." She looked him in the eye, her one good eye fierce and clear. "So you love me anyway, Jackson Reed? You love me, and I will love you, and we will fight them. Not with knives in alleys, but right here, on this land. We will just live. That is how we win." He pulled her into his lap, his arms going around her, careful of her ribs. He buried his face in her neck. "Clara," he breathed, just her name, like a prayer. They began to talk of marriage. It was Jackson who said it. A few days later, as he was helping her back to bed. "We should. A preacher," he mumbled. "Judge Parker. When he comes, we should. Make it right." Clara hesitated. She looked around the small, rough cabin. She looked out the window at the land, beautiful and unforgiving. She loved him. She loved him more than she thought it was possible to love anyone. But a piece of paper. "What if it is not enough? Jackson," she whispered, her fear returning. "What if the land swallows us? What if the hate wins? Mays is still out there. Parsons is still out there. What if they just keep coming, until there is nothing left of us?" He had no answer. He just held her hand, and they looked out at the distant thunderheads, a new storm gathering on the horizon. The fear that Clara had whispered in the dark, "What if hate wins?" did not fade. It settled over the cabin, a low-lying fog that the spring sun could not burn away. Her ribs healed, leaving a lattice of tender, purple bruises. The garden grew, but every new shoot felt temporary, a thing that could be crushed under a heavy boot. Jackson worked with a quiet, coiled intensity. He finished the corral, and the solid lines of it seemed to mock the fragility of their lives. He had nearly killed Lem. He had come close to that dark edge, and the knowledge of it sat between them, a third person in their small bed. They moved together. They worked together. They lay together under the rough quilts. But a new, unspoken terror was present. They had survived violence, but they were not sure they could survive the law. Sheriff Willard Mays had been silent for 2 weeks. It was a silence that was louder than gunfire. He was not a man to accept humiliation. He had lost his enforcers. Lem had vanished from town. his leg and his nerve broken, and Parsons was laying low. Mays had been forced to retreat. He did not retreat for long. He attacked not with fire or fists, but with paper. He rode out on a Tuesday, the sky a high, merciless blue. He was not alone. Beside him rode Mr. Eaton, the banker, Randolph's uncle and Mays's brother-in-law, a thin man with a dry face and eyes like closed accounts. Clara and Jackson were digging a new post hole for a gate. They saw the riders and stood slowly, their hands dropping to the tools, which were never far from the rifles. "Miss McAllister," Mays called, his voice slick and pleasant. He did not dismount. He stayed in the saddle, a position of power, a legal matter to discuss. He unrolled a sheaf of papers. "It seems your claim to this land is in error."
"That is a lie,"
Clara said, her voice flat. Jackson stood beside her, his hand resting on the hickory handle of the shovel. "It is not," the banker said, his voice like dry rust. "It is a matter of an outstanding lien, a debt incurred by your father, Angus McAllister, 6 years ago, a seed and equipment loan from my bank."
"He paid his debts,"
Clara said, though a cold knot was forming in her stomach. "He did not," Mays said, smiling. "He paid the interest for 1 year. Then, well, after the incident with my dear nephew, he seems to have forgotten. The loan, with compounded interest for 5 years, is now due, in full, immediately." "How much?" Jackson asked, his voice a low growl. The banker named a sum that was staggering. It was more than the land was worth, more than Clara could earn in 20 years. "It is a trick," Clara said, her voice shaking.
You let it sit. You waited."
"It is business," the banker said. "The debt is valid. The lien is held by the Eaton family. We are foreclosing this." He held up the final paper. "Is an eviction notice. You have 48 hours to vacate the property." Clara stared at the paper. This was it, the final blow. They could not fight this. They could not shoot a lien. They could not burn a debt. Mays had found the one weapon that could truly defeat them. The land wasn't just swallowed. It was being stolen, legally, right out from under her feet. "You cannot do this," Jackson said, stepping forward. Mays's hand dropped to his pistol. "I am doing it. Read, it is the law. You try to stop me. You are obstructing an officer in his duty. And I would so love to arrest you again. This time I will not need a false charge." They sat on the porch, watching the dust from the riders fade. The eviction notice lay on the rough plank between them. "I will not go," Jackson said. "And then what?" Clara's voice was dead. "They will come back with a posse. They will drag us off, or kill us, and they will call it justice. He won. Jackson. Hate won." She felt a hollowness so profound it scared her. The beatings, the fire. She could fight those, but this piece of paper, signed and sealed, had broken her. "What if we ride out?" Jackson said, his voice urgent. "To Oregon, like I was before. We can start new." Clara looked at her hands, the nails broken, the skin caked with the dark, rich soil of her home. She looked at the new walls of the cabin, the seams plugged with mud she had mixed herself. She looked at the grave on the distant ridge. "No," she whispered. "This is my land. I promised my father. I will not be run off. Not by them." "Then we fight," he said. "How?" she cried, her voice finally breaking. "How do we fight this?" She went inside, the small cabin suddenly feeling like a trap. She began to gather her few things, her father's hat, the extra quilt. Her eyes fell on the one thing she had carried with her from Laramie, the one thing she had owned her entire life, her father's heavy, leather-bound Bible. She had never opened it. It was just a thing of his, a connection. She picked it up, her hands trembling with rage and grief. It was just a book of hollow words. It had not saved her father. It had not saved her. She was about to throw it against the wall when she felt a thickness. The back cover. It was heavier than the front. The leather warped. She ran her nail along the inside edge. A seam. Her heart stopped. With her knife, she pried at the stiff, glued leather. It tore, revealing a shallow, carved-out space. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small, flat packet. Her hand shook so badly she could barely open it. There were 2 documents. The first was a single sheet of paper, a receipt, paid in full for the loan of seat and equipment. It was dated 5.5 years ago, and it was signed, in a precise, neat hand, by the elder Mr. Eaton, the banker's brother, Randolph's father. The second was a letter, in her father's rough hand. My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, I am gone, and the Eatons have shown their true colors. After you were acquitted, they came to me. They tried to call in this debt, to ruin me, to take the land as payment for their son's life. They thought me a broken fool. But I had paid it. Months before, I showed them this receipt. The elder Eaton. He was furious. But he could do nothing. He said he would find another way. I am hiding this. I fear what they will do. They are powerful, and I am old. Do not trust Mays. Do not trust any of them. But do not fear them. This land is yours. It is paid for in money, and it will be paid for in sweat. Do not let them take what is yours. Be brave, my girl. Be bold. Your loving papa. Clara sank to the floor, the papers clutched in her hand. He had known. He had seen it coming. He had left her a weapon. Jackson found her there, on the floor, weeping. Clara, what? She held up the receipt. He did not win. Jackson, she said, a strange, wild laugh bubbling in her throat. He did not win. Judge Parker's circuit court was not a building. It was a massive canvas tent, set up in the dusty square in the center of town. It was packed. The arrival of the judge was an event, and this case, whispered about all morning, was the main attraction. Clara walked in, and the tent went silent. She was clean, her hair pulled back, but the bruises on her face had faded to a sickly yellow, and her split lip was still scarred. She looked worn, but not broken. Mays and Mr. Eaton sat at a table, looking confident. We have the matter of the McAllister lien, the judge said, his voice a baritone boom. He was a large man, with a beard like iron filings and eyes that missed nothing. He had heard the rumors. He had seen Clara ride into town. He looked at her. Miss McAllister, the bank presents this debt. It seems valid. Do you have anything to say? Clara stood. She felt Jackson's presence, though she had made him wait outside. This part was hers. I do, Your Honor, she said, her voice clear and carrying. She walked forward and placed the oilcloth packet on his desk. I have this. The judge opened it. He read the letter. His expression did not change. He then read the receipt. He studied the signature. He looked at Mr. Eaton. Mr. Eaton, is this your brother's signature? The banker turned the color of ash. He stammered. It appears to be, but it must be a forgery. The debt is on our books. Is it? The judge asked. Or is it a debt you tried to collect twice? First from a grieving father, and now from his daughter, after your men. He glanced at Mays. Have burned her home and beaten her. Mays shot to his feet. That is a lie. There is no proof. There is the proof of my own eyes. Sheriff. The judge boomed. And this receipt. This is a canceled note. It is proof of payment. He picked up his gavel. This court finds that the lien on the McAllister property is fraudulent. The debt is void. The deed belongs to Miss Clara McAllister, free and unencumbered. He struck the gavel. The sound was like a gunshot. Furthermore, the judge said, his eyes narrowing, this court will be opening a formal investigation into the practices of the Eaton Bank. and the office of Sheriff Willard Mays. Mays stared, his face mottled with rage. He had been beaten. Publicly, he was ruined. He turned, his eyes finding Clara. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hate. He did not say a word. He stormed out of the tent, shoving townsfolk aside. Clara stood there, her legs shaking. She had won. She ran from the tent, the deed clutched in her hand. Jackson was waiting by the horses.
"Jackson!"
she cried, throwing her arms around him.
"It is over. It is ours. He cannot take it."
Jackson held her, but his eyes were not on her. They were on the street. "No," he said, his voice low. "It is not over." He pointed. Mays was at the sheriff's office. He was not alone. Jeb Parsons, Cole, and 2 other men, known troublemakers, were mounting their horses. They were checking their rifles. "He is coming," Jackson said. "He lost the law. Now he is coming without it."
"What do we do?"
Clara said, her triumph turning to ice. "We go home," Jackson said, "and we wait." They rode hard. They saw the dust cloud on the horizon, following them. They had a 10-minute lead. When they reached the cabin, they did not rest. They did not celebrate. "Clara, the cellar," Jackson said, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. "No." She ran inside and grabbed her own rifle, the one her father had left her. "I am not hiding. Not anymore. This is my home."
"Clara, this is not a fight you can—"
"It is the only fight I have." She stood on the porch, her face pale but set. Jackson stood in the doorway, a foot behind her, his body shielding her left. They loaded the rifles. They waited. The 5 riders thundered into the clearing. They fanned out, surrounding the cabin. "McAllister!" Mays roared. He was drunk, his face red, his uniform undone. He was a man with nothing left to lose. "This is your last warning. Get off this land."
"This land is mine,"
Clara shouted back, her voice clear.
"The judge said so. You are the one breaking the law. Mays."
"The judge is in town," Mays snarled, drawing his pistol. "I am the law out here. I am giving you one last chance. Get out, or I will burn this cabin to the ground with you in it." "No," Clara said. She took 1 step forward. So she was in the open. "You will not touch my home again." She raised her chin, her eyes finding his. "You will have to kill me to take what is mine." A terrible silence fell. There was only the sound of the wind and the click of Parsons cocking his rifle. "So be it," Mays whispered. He raised his pistol, aiming it square at Clara's chest. It happened faster than thought. Jackson moved, shoving Clara hard to the side. A gunshot cracked the air. Clara fell, stumbling, her head hitting the porch wall. Jackson grunted, a heavy, awful sound. He staggered back, his rifle clattering to the boards. He looked down at his shoulder, a look of strange surprise on his face. A dark, blossoming stain was spreading across his shirt. He had taken the bullet meant for her. "Jackson!" she screamed. A hot, white rage, purer than anything she had ever known, consumed her. She did not panic. She did not weep. She raised her father's rifle. Mays was still there, his pistol smoking, a look of triumph on his face. She fired. The recoil slammed the stock into her own bruised shoulder. Mays screamed, a high, thin sound, as the bullet tore through his gun arm. His pistol flew from his grasp. Parsons raised his rifle, but before he could fire, a new, booming voice echoed across the clearing. "Drop your weapons, by order of the territorial judge." All of them froze. Riding into the clearing, flanked by Deputy Pike and a dozen armed townsmen, Mr. Hemphill, the bartender, others, was Judge Parker. They had seen Mays ride out. They had known what he meant to do. They had followed. They saw it all. Jackson Reed, bleeding on the porch, unarmed. Sheriff Mays, clutching his wounded arm, his face a mask of hate. and Clara McAllister, standing over her man, her rifle smoking. "It is over, Willard," the judge said, his voice cold. He looked at the townsmen. "You all see? This is the man you trusted. He tried to murder this woman after she proved him a fraud." The townsmen looked at Mays, and their fear was finally replaced by disgust. "Deputy Pike," the judge ordered, "arrest him for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder." Pike, his face pale but resolute, drew his pistol. "Sheriff, you have to give me your badge." Mays, defeated, clutching his arm, tore the tin star from his chest and threw it in the mud. The standoff was over. Clara did not watch them take him away. She dropped the rifle and ran to Jackson. He had slumped against the wall, his eyes closed. "Jackson! Jackson! Look at me!" They got him inside, onto the bed. The judge offered his help. "I will send for a doctor." "There is no time," Clara said, her voice shaking. "Just go, please, all of you, go." They left. The cabin was suddenly terribly quiet. He was bleeding badly. The bullet had gone clean through, high in his shoulder. Clara's apron was soaked in seconds. She tore open his shirt, her bare hands sticky and red. She had nothing, no bandages, no medicine, only whiskey and rage. She grabbed a rag, poured the last of their whiskey on it, and pressed it into the wound. He roared, his back arching off the bed, his eyes flying open. He was pale, sweating, his breathing shallow. "I am sorry," she whispered, her hands shaking. "I am sorry. Just stay." She worked, her hands covered in his blood, her face streaked with tears and soot. She packed the wound. She tore her own skirt into strips for bandages. She was not a nurse. She was just a woman, desperate, fighting the one enemy she could not shoot. He was drifting, his eyes half closed, looking at her through a haze of pain. He saw her, her face fierce and terrified, her hair wild, her hands red. He tried to smile. It was a faint, painful grimace. You are a hell of a sight, Clara McAllister," he murmured, his voice a thread. He coughed, and a fleck of blood touched his lips. All this time," he whispered. "The town, they said you were too bold." He reached, his good hand finding her bloody arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "You are not too bold." He looked at her, his gray eyes clear, seeing all of her. "You are just brave enough for me." The strength that had held her up on the porch, the rage that had fired the rifle, it all shattered. A great shuddering sob tore through her. She was not brave. She was terrified. She leaned down, pressing her forehead to his, her tears dripping onto his pale, sweating face. She kissed his brow. "Do not die," she whispered, her voice fierce, breaking. "Do not you dare die on me, Cowboy." She kissed his cheek, tasting his sweat and her own tears. "You hear me? You stay with me." He did not answer. His eyes slipped closed. She took his hand, held it to her lips, and went back to pressing the bandage against the wound. As the shadows in the small cabin grew long, he did not die, but he tried. For 3 days, he rode the edge, lost in a gray, sweating hell of fever and pain. Clara did not sleep. She sat beside the bed, her hands still stained with his dried blood, now grimed with axle grease and herbs. She forced bitter willow bark tea between his cracked lips. She sponged his burning body with cool water from the creek. She held him down when he thrashed, his voice rough, calling a name, Bethany. "I am here," she would whisper, her voice raw. "It is Clara. I am here. You stay, Jackson. You stay." On the 4th morning, the air in the cabin was hot and still. His breathing was so shallow. She had to put her ear to his chest to hear it. She had done everything.
She had no more strength, no more tears. She just sat, her head bowed, her hand on his chest. She fell asleep that way, slumped over him. She woke to a touch. His good hand, weak, trembling, was on her hair. She snapped awake. His eyes were open. They were his. The fever was gone. They were gray and clear, and looking at her. "You are a mess, Clara," he whispered. She choked out a sound, half laugh, half sob. "So are you, Cowboy." The healing was slow. It was a grinding, agonizing process that tested them both. The wound was deep. He was weak as a newborn, and he hated it. Clara, her own body still a map of fading bruises, did everything. She hauled the water. She hoed the garden, her rifle strapped to her back. She mended the porch railing where he had fallen. She learned to split firewood, the heavy axe blistering her hands anew. Jackson sat on the porch, a quilt over his legs, his arm in a sling. He watched her. He watched her fight the land he was supposed to be working. He saw the exhaustion pulling at her face, the new, hard set of her shoulders. He had been her protector. Now, he was her burden. "I can do that," he would grumble, as she struggled to lift a heavy bucket. "No," she would say, not unkindly. "You sit, you heal. Your job is to get strong." His frustration was a poison in the small cabin. He was silent, grim. She understood. He was a man defined by his strength, his ability to act. Now, he could only watch. "You think I like this?" she finally snapped, dropping a load of wood by the door. She was sweating, covered in dirt, and her patience was gone. "You think I like you looking at me like I am failing?" He looked up, shocked. "I do not—" "You do," she said, her voice shaking. "You watch me, and you get angry. You are angry you are not doing it. But I am doing it. It is getting done. You saved my life. Jackson, you took a bullet for me. You do not get to be angry at me for keeping us alive while you heal. That is my job now." He stared at her, seeing the fierce, tired pride. He saw the woman who had faced down a sheriff, who had won her land, who was now, single-handedly, building their life. He reached out his good hand. "Come here." She hesitated, then knelt by his chair. "I am not angry at you, Clara," he said, his voice rough. He touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a streak of dirt. I am not used to this being cared for." "Get used to it," she said, her voice softening. "Clara," he said, "the wheat. You cannot let it go." She had forgotten the spring wheat, her father's dream. In the chaos, she had not. "I will help," he said. I can drive the mule." They had no mule. She bought one a week later. She rode into Cedar Gap, alone. The town was quiet. When she walked into the mercantile, Mr. Hemphill turned pale. "Miss McAllister," he said, his hands flat on the counter. I heard what happened. What Mays did, it was wrong." Clara looked at him. She did not want his apology. "I need seed, wheat, and I need a mule. I have the deed. The land is good for it." Hemphill swallowed. "No need. Your credit is good." It was the first sign. The town was changing. Judge Parker had done his work. The Eaton Bank was under territorial review. Its doors closed. Mays was gone. Sent to the federal prison in Laramie, the power that had choked Cedar Gap was broken. And the story had been told. The real one. The one where Clara McAllister, the town harlot, had faced down a corrupt sheriff and a line of gunmen, all to protect the land she had proven was hers. The story of how Jackson Reed, the town killer, had taken a bullet for her. They were not outcasts anymore. They were legends. The townsfolk, freed from Mays's shadow, looked at her differently. The whispers were still there, but they were no longer sharp. They were awed.
She faced him down, they say, shot him right off his horse. And Reed, he is healing out there. She is tending him. Mrs. Hemphill, who had once stared at her with porcelain contempt, came out of the back room. She laid a wrapped parcel on the counter.
"A pie," she said, her voice stiff. "Apple, and this was my mother's."
It was a heavy, warm quilt. Clara looked at the offering. It was a truce, an apology.
"Thank you,"
Clara said, and the word was as solid as a handshake. The land, tended by her fierce, desperate hands, bloomed. The garden overflowed with beans and squash, and the wheat grew. Jackson, his arm still healing but his strength returning, sat on the buckboard, driving their new mule in slow, steady rows. Clara walked behind, sowing the seed. They worked from sunup to sundown. It was a new sound, the sound of life, the sound of a harvest to come. He started rebuilding the barn. He could only use one arm well, but he was stubborn. He learned to brace the timbers, to use leverage. Clara worked beside him, lifting what he could not. They did not talk about the shooting. They did not talk about the future. They just built. The summer was hot and dry, but their creek did not fail. They worked and they healed. The scars on Jackson's shoulder, like the scars on his temple, became part of him. The bruises on Clara's face faded, leaving only the memory. They fell back into their shared bed. At first, it was just sleep. Two exhausted bodies falling into the dark. But the quiet intimacy returned. He would wake in the night, his shoulder aching, and she would be there. She would get him water, or just hold his good hand in the dark. He began to carve again. In the long evenings, sitting on the porch, he would take a piece of wood from the lightning-scarred pine on the ridge. He would turn it over and over, his knife moving slowly, carefully. He was quiet for a week. Clara watched him, knowing something was turning in his mind. One night, the harvest was in. The small, rebuilt barn was full of their wheat. The smell of it, dry and rich, was the smell of victory. The moon was high, silvering the corrals. They sat on the porch. The wind was cool, carrying the first hint of autumn. "I went up to the ridge today," Jackson said, his voice quiet. Clara looked at him. "I told Bethany about you," he said. "I told her what you did, how you fought." He turned to her, his gray eyes clear in the moonlight. "She would have liked you. Clara, you are like her. You do not flinch." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the piece of wood he had been carving. It was a ring. Not polished, not perfect, but solid. It was carved from the pale, scarred wood of the pine. "I asked you before," he said, his voice rough. "In my head, I thought a preacher, a piece of paper, to make it right like the town wants." He looked at the ring in his scarred palm. "But that is not us." He held it out to her. "I do not have gold. I do not have a house to offer. Just this cabin we built from ashes." He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "No priest, no fuss. Just say you will keep waking up beside me. Just say you will stay." Clara looked at the simple wooden ring. It was worth more to her than all the gold in the Eaton Bank. It was the wood from the tree that held his sister. It was carved by the hand that had taken a bullet for her. Her fear, the fear that the land would swallow them, that hate would win, it was still there, but it was small. And this feeling, this solid, true thing in front of her, was bigger. She held out her hand. "Yes," she whispered, "I will stay." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. They did not wait. The next evening, at sunset, they walked up the ridge. They stood under the lone pine, before the small grave of stones. The wind was their witness. The sky, turning a deep, bruised purple, was their church. Jackson took her hands. Jackson Reed, take you, Clara McAllister.
before this land, and before my sister. You are my home. You are my brave. I will protect you. I will stand by you, always." Clara smiled, her eyes wet. Clara McAllister, take you. Jackson Reed, you are the only man who ever saw me. You are the only man who makes me feel safe. I will stand by you. I will hold you. I will not let you die. Always." He kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of promise. It was as real as the dirt under their boots and as vast as the sky above them. They were married. Life settled into a new shape. The town, slowly, began to accept them. They were a fact, solid as the mountains. They came to the McAllister Reed land to trade. The ranchers needed her vegetables. The women, curious, came to see the woman who had tamed the town ghost. They found a woman in a worn skirt, her hands in the dirt, who looked at them with clear, assessing eyes, and they found they respected her. One day, Clara rode into town for supplies. She saw a girl, no older than 16, getting off the stage. The girl was alone, her face pale, a bruise half hidden by her bonnet. She looked lost, and she looked terrified. Clara saw herself. That night, she sat at the small table, a piece of paper in front of her. Jackson watched her, the lamplight catching the new silver in her hair. She wrote, "To the Honorable Judge Parker, you gave me justice. You gave me back my land. Now, I wish to use it. This cabin, my home, is safe. It was built by good hands. I am writing to tell you that if in your travels you find a woman who is running from violence, who has nowhere to go, you can send her to me. Tell her to come to the land with the lone pine on the ridge. Tell her to ask for Clara. This will be a place for them, somewhere to rest and to begin again, respectfully. Clara Reed." She sealed the letter. She had survived. Now, she would help others do the same. A quiet night, weeks later. The first snow had touched the high peaks. The air was crisp. Clara was leaning against Jackson on the porch, his good arm, now strong, wrapped around her. His scarred arm rested on his knee. They were watching the world grow dark. "It is quiet," she murmured. "It is," he agreed. She was quiet for a long time, listening to the wind, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. "They said I was too bold," she said, her voice soft, almost to herself. Jackson smiled against her hair. He turned his head and kissed her shoulder. "And I said they do not know what kind of man it takes to love a woman like you." She smiled, leaning her head back against his chest. In the far, far distance, over the mountains, lightning flashed, a silent, silver crack in the darkness. It was just the sky. It did not scare her anymore. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love for you to comment with where you are listening from to connect with others. And we invite you to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts.